We're having good talks. We started with Russia. We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress. People are starting to realize it's a good deal for both parties. If they got to stop the war, they're losing a lot of people, a lot of soldiers, mostly soldiers.
And you heard it there. President Trump says they are making progress in peace talks to end the 4-year war between Russia and Ukraine. That message comes after a U.S. official told CBS News yesterday that Ukraine, quote, agreed to a peace deal with only minor details left to sort out. But the Kremlin is throwing cold water on that optimism today. According to Reuters, when asked if a peace deal was near, Russian spokesman Dmitry Peskov says it's, quote, premature to say. Let's bring in CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis. Olivia, thanks for joining us again today. We heard the president touch on that 28-point peace plan yesterday. Did he give any updates on how it's been revised?
He did, Mugo, and it's worth noting that we're now in the second pendulum swing of these revisions to the original 28-point plan, which officials here did say was backed by the U.S. But after that groundswell of objections from Ukraine and from Europeans across the board about it being heavily weighted in favor of Russia, it was workshopped frenetically over the weekend to reflect more priorities for Ukraine. But now the president is making it sound like the 28 points were much more of a starting point than a done deal. Here's what he had to say.
There were a lot of Republicans who felt that the first plan, the first 28-point plan, was too favorable to Russia. Have you changed that?
Well, that was just a map. All that was is a map. That was not a plan. It was a concept. And from there, they've taken each one of the 28 points, and then you got down to 22 points. A lot of them were solved, and actually very favorably solved. So we'll see what happens.
So an evolution in the number of points, possibly their substance, but as you mentioned, Russia so far is distancing itself from this process, even as U.S. officials are telling us that there's still plenty of optimism and momentum in these parallel diplomatic talks involving both Ukraine and Russia. There is a risk here, though, Mugo, that Russia winds up believing that this deal, if it departs significantly from its starting demands, isn't worth really making right now, that it's battlefield momentum and President Trump's growing frustration with the impasse that has been here will mean more leverage for Russia down the line and a better deal in several months' time.
Okay. The president also touched on security guarantees and says it's something that will be worked out with Europe. This is a must for President Zelensky and his team, right?
Absolutely. Alongside the question of what territory Russia will get to hold, security guarantees are the paramount concern right now for Ukraine. After the attacks that Russia launched in 2014 and 2022, Ukraine sees security guarantees as the only real way to prevent another invasion, even if there is a ceasefire in between. And frankly, it's not just Ukraine, because countries like Germany are sounding the alarm. Military and intelligence officials there have been warning that Russia could, in fact, be preparing for the option, at least, of targeting NATO countries within the next 4 years. So the big question now is what the U.S.'s role will be. Would Washington join European states in a coordinated military backstop on Ukraine's behalf? Or is its role going to be more relegated to economic support and intelligence sharing if aggression flares up again? Obviously, the more robust the U.S. commitment is, the stronger a deterrent it is for Russia. But President Trump has been clear that he doesn't think that this is America's fight and that Europe needs to be doing much more to shoulder the burden right now.
Okay. Olivia Gazis, thank you so much for your time today. And now let's bring in CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand for how all of this is playing out at the White House. Natalie, thank you for joining us today. What does the administration say is the next step in all this?
Good to be back with you, Mugo. Well, the president says that talks will continue, but he's obviously pushing out the initial Thanksgiving deadline that he had floated earlier. Now, as you and Olivia were discussing, this 28-point peace plan that the president says was authored by the U.S., he now says it's been fine-tuned with additional input from both sides, but also noted that there are still, a few areas of disagreement that remain. So he was asked about the immediate next steps on Air Force One while traveling to Florida last evening, ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday. Here's what he had to say.
They're going to keep talking. They're talking to Russia now. It's Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process. Smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
So that echoes what the president had also said on social media, that his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will be headed to Russia very soon, and that the Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, will be the one to meet or continue to meet with the Ukrainian side. Now, as for, the earlier reporting about Zelensky potentially coming to the U.S. to finalize a deal as soon as this week, President Trump on social media said he hopes to meet with Zelensky and Putin very soon, but not until this deal is in the final stages, Mugo.
And Natalie, you mentioned a special envoy, Steve Witkoff, earlier. What can you tell us about a leaked conversation?
Yeah, so Bloomberg News has published what it says is a transcript of a call between Witkoff and a top Putin aide on October 14th, in which Witkoff seems to give advice to the Russians on how Putin should pitch President Trump, talk to him about a peace deal. And the timing of the call is also significant because it happened just ahead of President Zelensky's visit to the White House back in October. You probably remember that. And Witkoff suggested that Putin should talk to President Trump ahead of that meeting. And as you remember, there was that phone call between President Trump and Putin just the day before Zelensky arrived here to the White House. Now, Nancy Cordes was on Air Force One last night. She asked the president about this new reporting by Bloomberg. Here's what he had to say.
I haven't heard it, but I heard it was standard negotiation.
So you're not worried that he's too pro-Russian?
No, I think, look, this war could go on for years, and Russia's got a lot more people, got a lot more soldiers, So I think if Ukraine can make a deal, it's a good thing. I think it's great for both.
Now, a White House official, in response to the story, said it proves that Special Envoy Witkoff talks to officials in both Russia and Ukraine nearly every day to achieve peace, which is exactly what President Trump appointed him to do. So the White House clearly defending Special Envoy Witkoff here. But some lawmakers and Ukrainian members of parliament are raising concerns, say this new reporting brings up questions. Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska questioned whether Witkoff can be trusted. And Representative Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania also weighed in, saying that Secretary of State Rubio should be allowed to do his job in a fair and objective manner, Mugo.
Okay, Natalie Brand, thank you so much for your time today.